Hello, and welcome to the next edition of The Courage to Learn for July of 2012. My name is Lisa Langell, and I specialize in wildlife photography. And today I'm going to be talking about some images from one of my followers, Doug, who had the courage to submit some images for critique. I want to talk a little bit first about how I critique, so you better understand where I'm coming from. First, I looked at the relative strengths and weaknesses of the image compared to the image itself, not to other images of Doug's or other images from other artists. I also leave room for artistic license. What I might like, someone else may not, and vice versa. I'm giving my opinions, but it doesn't detract from what the artist perceived and wanted to do. So he can take it with a grain of salt, listen to the things that may be helpful, and dismiss the other things. I'll suggest a few tips, but again, none of them are a mandate to complete the image in a better or different way. Sometimes things that go against the rules will work. I've seen plenty of art go against composition and technical rules and actually be beautiful. So again, I'm going to provide some guidelines for rules when appropriate, but it doesn't mean that in some cases something can't look beautiful when it goes against those rules. And lastly, and most importantly, I offer respect for the photographer as an artist. These images are not assignments that I've given that are supposed to be compared to certain requirements and they passed or failed. This is simply art as the photographer captured it, and I'm giving my feedback. I'm one of millions of photographers, and my feedback is simply that. So I never mean to demean or degrade any photographer with any critique I do, and in fact, my hope is that it'll give someone an additional perspective to think about their art, so the next time they go out and shoot, they can contemplate whether my suggestions might improve the artwork that they produce. So the first image that Doug provided to me is of a yellow-headed blackbird. Now, Doug, just a personal thanks on this one. The yellow-headed blackbird was my nemesis for the longest period of time when I lived out east. And I had the hardest time trying to find one because it was a rare or accidental species for the Northeast. When I finally found one, I just remember how joyful I was to be able to see it and watch it sing, and your image just brought me right back to that first time I spotted one. So, nice capture. The other things that I really like about this image is that you caught this bird doing something. So often I see what I call documentation shots or just nice portraits. And it's not that those things are bad. We need those. We enjoy those. But for some diversity and switching it up, it sure is nice to see a bird doing something. And in this case, I can literally hear in my head the song that he's singing while he's all puffed up during breeding season here. So I love that you caught him doing that as opposed to just sitting on that reed. So one thing that I want to mention that I think you did fairly well here is expose this bird. It's really difficult when you're setting exposure settings in your camera to expose birds properly when they have very bright spots and when they have very dark spots. So the white and the black and the yellow and also the background, you have these kind of competing elements, and one is usually overexposed. In this case, if anything, everything is slightly underexposed, which is not necessarily bad. We can correct for some of that in Photoshop even more. But when things get too overexposed, it can certainly be a challenge as well. And you did a nice job. I'm not sure if you used spot metering or matrix metering when you took this image, but you did a nice job. The blacks are a hair dark, and I'm going to talk about that in a moment, but overall this has a lot we can do with it. So nice job. The last thing that I want to say that I love is that you caught this bird in a way that you focused properly and it's tack sharp. That's really important to me. And for those viewing this video, you may say, well, it might look a little soft. Sometimes that's due to the compression in the video. But when I looked at the original image that Doug sent me, it was nice and sharp, which I appreciate. It also didn't look like it was cropped up too much. Sometimes I get images that look to fill the frame or partly fill the frame, and they've been cropped to death and it shows. And so, Doug, it looks like you were at a reasonably appropriate distance for this particular image. Okay, so let's talk about a few things that I would say you could do next time you find yourself in a similar situation to photograph it and process it digitally in a way that'll just give it a little extra oomph. One thing that I do like here that you did, and if I drew a tic-tac-toe grid across this image, you'll see here in a second that this image is compositionally sound. Now let's talk about composition for a minute with your technical aspects of this photo. First of all, typically, and I've just put a grid over this image, typically we always like to look for images where an important piece of the image is at one of these intersecting points in kind of the northeast, southeast, southwest, or northwest corners of this grid. So I like that the head area, and sometimes people will do it right with the eye, but I like that this here is weighted in this area here, and then you've got the opposite end here. I think it works. That said, there are some things that you could do, because there's another rule about composition when we talk about photographing animals, and that's to leave them room to go or move. And in this case, with the bird pointing towards the right-hand side of the image, although you do have sufficient room here, I think if you were to move this a little bit and position this bird more in the left third of the image, I think it would be a little stronger. Another couple of things that I think you could do, and you could do this in Photoshop, and in fact I'm going to show you shortly what I did just to kind of show you a couple of options to think about, is to bring up the color here a little bit. You've got a really dark muddy black, and I've lost some of the detail in the feather. I took a closer look at this image, and you can bring back a lot of those details. It's not like on your histogram it was so far beyond that you clipped the black side of things or the dark side, but there is enough there that I can bring it back. I'm wondering if you shot this photo in RAW. You sent me a JPEG, which would be common, but if you shot this image in RAW, you can really do some restorative work beyond what you could do in it with a JPEG if you were shooting JPEG. So let me show you what I did and talk about what I did and give you some thoughts. First of all, let's talk about composition. This is what I mean when I say if I moved this bird over to the left third, you have a little bit more room for it to go, and this heaviness on this side and this negative space can complement each other. And in fact, you might even be able to even bring a little bit more space into here and really have this aligning properly in its third. But right now, it's really not poor. What I did, just so you know, is I brought this into Photoshop, created a new layer, a background layer that was larger than your original print, and then I took your original print, pasted it on there as another layer, and then did a content aware fill so that you would just get an idea of what I was talking about adding extra to this image. So again, I'm not suggesting that you manipulate your images to that extent. I just more or less wanted to do something so you could see what it would look like if we changed a little bit with the composition. The other thing that I did, I'm going to go back to your previous image here for a moment. You'll notice here that this was pretty dark and this eye got pretty muddy and black, as well as these areas here. I brought these up a little bit in levels and then also did a little bit of dodging with your midtones and shadows, as well as some highlights to just pop this eye a little bit more. I also went in and did a little layering, an overlay layer, and painted in some white and blew this up to just make that highlight pop a little bit more. It was already there, but I think this image was slightly underexposed, and so I was trying to bring some of that back. I also, with the levels, lightened up some of these feathers here. Now you could play with it further, but you start to see here more of the detail in the feathers, and again, you're looking at a compressed image in this video. When you look at it in the original image, you'll see some better detail. The other thing that I did here, you'll notice this really dark spot here in the reeds. Overall, I like the color balance or the color harmony between the browns and the blue here. I like that the reeds are in here softly. It doesn't distract from this bird here. You did a nice job of separating the bird from its background. Wonderful. But in one little case here, I found that my eye kept coming down here to this dark area. So after I lightened the image a little bit using levels in Photoshop, which you could certainly do, I also went in with shadow dodge and dodged out some of the darkest parts of this so it was just even. And now my eye just says, okay, here's the context. I know there's some other reeds in the background, and this is either water or sky here, but I now am not continually going down to that super dark area down here. I just lightened it up a little bit. All right, nice job on that image. I really love it. I love the action in it, and I think you did a good job. I think Photoshop here can correct a few things post-processing, and then next time you go and shoot, you'll have some new things to think about. Your next image that you gave me is really interesting. I love the fact with this bird that his legs are literally out sideways and he's holding on to this reed. How you caught this moment is amazing. I've only ever seen a handful of other photographs where people have had birds like this not necessarily this bird, but, a sparrow or a wren or whatnot, posing, holding two opposing, leaves or stems or, anything like that. It just looks really cool. And I love the symmetry in it. I also love that this water in the background, I think it's water, looks really, really painterly and just really soft. I think that adds something to it. And it looks like, I'm not sure if this is mold on these stems or what it is, but it just looks really cool. I think a couple things again just to think about, and I didn't go through and process these images in a different way for you. But again, like the last image, see if you can go in post-processing and bring up some of this dark. I kind of just get this dark blob here, and I want to see the detail. I want to see some of the feathers. I want to see some of the highlights, even within the black. Black is a very difficult a color to photograph when you're photographing it against light backgrounds. This is one of the perpetual challenges, and there's not always much you can do in wildlife photography, as far as HDR techniques and so forth, because these birds are moving. So you've really got to look at your metering carefully and look at your exposure, and sometimes you may use exposure compensation to adjust for some of those problems. It is a trick, though, and I suggest reading up on it because it takes some time and some practice. In some situations, it's just not going to work well. But I 100% give you bonus points for finding this moment because it's super, super cool. Even the way this bird is perched on these reeds, I just love the positioning here as opposed to in the middle. Like, everything about it I really love from a compositional standpoint. So, well done on that. I think we just need to bring up these midtones. And as far as cropping goes, I think you cropped it well. I love it centered like this because everything else is so symmetrical. And if you were to put this in a frame or canvas wrap, you still have plenty of room around the edges to wrap around the sides, which is sometimes a challenge for photographers. We photograph so close and compose the image perfectly in the frame, and then we go to post it onto a canvas wrap or frame it or crop it slightly differently to fit a different size frame, and all of a sudden we've lost critical elements of the image. So nice job on this one. But again, I would just play up the darks, play with levelings, and bring out some of that highlight or catch light in that eye. I think it needs it. All right, so bonus points again for getting the darling birds here. You have captured a mountain bluebird, a pair of mountain bluebirds, and that one's still on my life list. I still need to get that bird. So nice done, Doug. Nice job, excuse me. So with this image, there are some really compelling things that I love. You did some things that are perfect. Some things here that I love. I love this pole. I mean, you can't organize where the birds stand, but the fact that they happen to stand here, this pole, and you put it in the left third, really nice job. In fact, I wouldn't even mind it if there was just a hair more on the other side of this, and you could probably build that back in a little bit with content aware fill if you needed to. I adore the fact that this barbed wire is exactly in the lower third of the image. You didn't plunk it right down in the middle. Wonderful. I also love that these two birds play against each other. You've got one lower and one higher. And the color harmonies, not that again you can control for this all the time, but the blues and the golds and the warm colors all play well together, and I love this. You also did a good job of separating the background from the subjects. And I don't know what this is back here, if it's houses or cars, or I have no idea what this is, water. But in some ways, I find it just an added element to draw your eye from here all the way over to here, in addition to the barbed wire. Now, a couple of things that I might consider doing to even bring this image more over the top. First of all, I would probably build, or if you were to reshoot it, which that would be difficult to do, but I think with Photoshop's content aware fill, you could get away with this. Build in a little bit more on the left edge and the right edge. I find a similar problem as I did with the blackbirds. Not so much with this one here, but definitely with this one here. I feel like if he were to take off, he would fly against this wall. We need to give them a little bit more space to look. The viewer wants to know what they're looking at. And even though you might not be able to see, your eye kind of wants to go there for a little while. So I would like to see, another couple of inches over here of space just to allow these birds some room to move. Now, it would have been amazing if these birds would have actually turned their heads in towards each other. I think that, from a compositional standpoint, would be a little bit more comfortable to view, as opposed to them looking away from each other because your eyes kind of want to go in either direction and then they stop up against the end of the image. That said, there's also something kind of comical here with regard to them maybe being in what humans might interpret to be an argument or a standoff or flirting or whatever it might be. So there's some kind of humor and play in here as well that I kind of like. So again, it's your own personal interpretation as to what you might prefer, looking in or looking away from each other. Those are just kind of some of my thoughts that I'm thinking about as they're looking away. If anything else, I would just build in a little bit more on either side if you could, and if you feel comfortable with that ethically in a photograph. That's personal opinion, personal choice, but I think it would just add a little bit more breathing room. It's not like you're adding extra elements. You're not placing a third or fourth bird in this image. You're just simply getting a little bit more of this background. And or perhaps the way you cropped the image for me, perhaps you have more of that background in your original image. Just go and recrop it so that you can have a little bit more there. Beautiful image with the catch lights, by the way. The exposure looks perfect. I wouldn't do another thing there. It looks tack sharp, which is my number one thing. If the eyes in the image isn't tack sharp, nothing else matters. So good job there, Doug. Thank you. And again, gorgeous birds. Just absolutely gorgeous. Can't wait to see one in real life one day. Okay, so I saved my very favorite of your images for last. This one needs nothing, in my opinion. I love what you've done here, and it looks like there is, and I don't know if you did a post-processing treatment to this or not, but it looks like there's a bit of water and maybe some fog, and just these layers here are to die for. I absolutely love this image. This is a 10 for me. Your composition is perfect. If you were to draw thirds in this image, this line here creates a perfect third. This one down here, another third. The tree falls right in the third here, and then you have another third here with empty white space, which is a perfect balance for this heavy tree. The only little thing I noticed, you might just want to clone this out, looks like a little dust spot or something here, or maybe a water droplet, I'm not sure. I would probably just clone that out a little bit. I find it a little bit distracting. Other than that, and maybe this little teeny spot here my eye keeps wanting to go to, other than that, I think it is perfect. I love it, and if it were mine, I would have it on my wall. I absolutely think it's beautiful. Way to go, Doug. I think this is contest worthy. Stunning image. I really, really love it. I want to say thank you for having the courage to submit your images today. You did a wonderful job. I can't wait to see more work from you. And thanks so much, too, for supporting me and my work as well. I hope this has been helpful, and have a wonderful day. I wish you success. Take care.